everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. We are back again this week with someone from the community, and that person is Kristin Sullivan. Kristin is the executive director of the Retreat Farm, which is on a mission to connect people to the land and one another in many, many different ways. She grew up in central New York State, spent time in the Adirondacks, and studied art education, religious studies, and anthropology. Kristin has worked for various nonprofits over the years that promote multicultural and indigenous traditions, art, nature, and the humanities. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here because you folks are doing so much in the community, and you've been on board for a couple of years now,
Just
right?
over 2 years.
Just over 2 years. And it's just amazing to me the amount of things that you're doing. So just going back a little bit before we jump into the Retreat Farm. When you were a kid growing up, you grew up in central New York, as did I. Yep. And so you are a kindred spirit because many people just don't understand central New York. They think New York City, Binghamton maybe, Buffalo,
right.
But
this whole world in between.
Yeah, and then there's just farmland or whatever, which is kind of true, or has been true over the years.
So I grew up in Norwich, New York, which I always tell people has more cows than people, or did when I lived there anyway. Yeah. It's actually very near where Chobani yogurt is made now. It's a landmark for folks. Every summer, starting when I was 2, my family went up to a very small cabin up in Eagle Bay, New York, which is near Old Forge in the Adirondacks, and stayed there for the summer. And so a lot of my fondest memories really are on lakes and in the mountains in the Adirondacks.
The Adirondacks are vast. That's another thing about New York State. Very often people will say upstate New York, and you kind of look at them because you know that they're probably thinking of Poughkeepsie or Newburgh.
I didn't actually know the term upstate New York until I moved out of New York. So actually when I was a teenager, I moved to New Jersey for a time, and that's when I first heard the term, and I was like, what? Because we were in central New York, and my husband's from western New York, and I lived in the Adirondacks, and there's all these different regions.
Yeah. When you were growing up, you were interested in art, you played the guitar a little bit. What kind of influence did those things have?
Oh, a huge influence, and I'll even back up and say that two of my early influences were my grandmothers, who both painted and in different styles, but I learned a lot from them, and particularly my mom's mother, who actually painted oil paint murals on the walls in her apartment, my grandparents' apartment, and I was allowed to paint with oil paints on the kitchen wall, and it was like, wow, transformational. But she was also a really strict teacher in a way, and would tell me, no, apples don't look like that. Look at an apple and tell me, what are the colors in this? And so I learned from her and others along the way, but I think that art was always an outlet for me. Whatever else was going on in life, it's a way to express what you're feeling. It's a way to connect with others. It's also a way to explore ideas creatively and get your mind sort of outside the box a little bit for problem solving. So it's done a lot for me in my life, and I really appreciate that. And music is similarly, I think, been a safe haven for me, and I learned piano a little bit, guitar some, and I've always sung as well. So I think I found refuge in music.
Also, and we'll talk about the various things that you've done, but you've got a right brain, left brain thing going on, it sounds like. Yeah, it's great to be able, to be able to know that balance, the need for that balance too.
Yeah. Balance or at war sometimes, I don't know which.
Well, yes, there's that. You were studying art education, and also where did anthropology come into all of this, and religious studies? Yeah,
so I think from the time I was maybe 5 until I was in college, I wanted to be an art teacher, and I went to UVM my freshman year of college for art education. And I am sure that I went skiing more than I went to class, and I had to figure out, what am I really doing here? And I think that it was the first time that I was really sort of free to be on my own. I was one of those freshman kids that was just like, free in the world, and I had a lot of fun. And I had to rein it in some, and I really thought about, what do I want to be doing? I had 5 or 6 majors and probably just as many minors. Religious studies was the degree that the bachelor's degree that I got. So that led me to doing a study abroad, which I did through SIT. And I studied Buddhist art and architecture in the Himalayas for a summer. And which was very much related to the religious studies major that I had. But when I was there, I had a series of experiences where we were going to these really small towns in remote villages in the Himalayas, and I could see the influence of tourism. and the way that local people were sort of performing their heritage and identity in different ways. And I was fascinated by this, but also really aware of my own place in this, or uncomfortable almost with my own place in this, and what was the influence that I was having. And I came back from that experience, and I didn't have the language to really deal with that or to process it. And at the time, I worked at a bar where one of our regulars was an anthropology professor, and I was talking to him about this, and he said, "You should really sit in on this class I'm teaching." And it was the anthropology of ecotourism and heritage conservation. And I was like, wow. Just there's a whole field dedicated to these questions that I was having and uncomfortability I was feeling. And so I ended up, I was really fascinated by this one professor who wrote a book that we read in that class, and I sought him out, and I applied to the program for grad school that he led. Thankfully, he chose me to be part of the cohort of students that year, and so I ended up with him as my advisor, Dr. Irv Chambers, and ended up getting my master's and PhD in anthropology, which was not part of my undergrad plans at all. But here I am. Initially, absolutely thought I was going to go back to India and study heritage tourism and study ecotourism or something in that world, and I ended up where Dr. Chambers, my advisor, asked me to be part of a research project that he was doing with the National Park Service, where he was hired to learn about cultural traditions that are related to, in this case, it was a place called Assateague Island National Seashore. And the National Park Service does studies on the human history of their different parks and so forth. So I came on as a researcher, a research assistant helping him, and started doing interviews with local folks about different cultural traditions. And I ended up getting kind of fascinated with the world of all things of decoy making. So hunting decoys, these wooden birds that people put out to attract live prey. And it'd be a whole other show about why I became fascinated with that. But that's what I ended up writing my dissertation on, was hunting decoys and culture related to that. But what I found was that people, when we started talking about a decoy, you would talk about the decoy for maybe 30 seconds, and then you ended up having these conversations about environmental conservation and who has the right to access different parts of wetlands and wildlife, and what they thought about tourism development in the neck of the woods where I was. And so it was all the same questions and thoughts that I was having about religious tourism in India. It was just applied to tourism in Chincoteague Island, Virginia instead. How
did you and the retreat find each other?
So I, after I got my PhD, ended up doing a couple different jobs, landed in what they call the eastern shore of Maryland, which is between the Chesapeake Bay and Atlantic Ocean, where I was executive director of a museum there called the Ward Museum. I was fortunate to be at a point where I was in a job that I liked, but I knew that I wasn't where I wanted to be. And so my husband and I, talked about where would we want to go if we could go anywhere, and both of us zeroed in on Vermont.
Really?
And yes, and just both of us wanted to be back in the Northeast, and we love experiences I've had with Vermont and the scenery and the arts and some of the social values and so forth. So I literally just set up a Google alert that said executive director in Vermont. And I was at a farmer's market of all places when I got the alert about the job at Retreat Farm. I was like, shut up, this is too perfect. Like all the reasons that I wanted to be at a farmer's market with the local agriculture and food, with music and community and all this stuff, I was like, this is perfect. So I figured, why not? I'd try, and here I am.
Your last museum job, And so you did a tremendous amount of things. You had a folk life program, collections management, budgets, grant writing, public programming, editor of the museum's journal, ethnographic research. I'm just letting folks know that you are really well prepared for this job.
Thank you.
For one thing, but also the fact that these all tie into the things that you were interested in. So you came for an interview and they did all this stuff, and they hired you. You have like a multiplex down there. I mean, in thinking about the show today, I was thinking, I think people are still getting clarity on all of the things that you offer, and the setup there as well, because it's I was picturing it as like this tableau, of different farm buildings. You've got barns and you've got the big yellow house, and where Grafton Cheese is now your food hub center.
Right.
It's really a campus. You've got the barns with kids can come and pet the animals, and then further behind you've got all of the trails.
Yep.
There's over 11 miles, I think, of trails behind
Just
there.
about 11, yep.
Yeah, and you've got so many different things that are all connected and all interconnected. And just to give you a placement, the retreat farm is down Lower Linden Street, which is basically Route 30.
Yes.
Right? And so you've got a lot of traffic coming and going. Last year with construction, you had a ton of traffic coming and going. And you're trying to build the North Barn.
Yeah.
But if you're coming into town, if you look over to the right, you see this grouping it's very appealing grouping of different buildings on all doing different things. So that's the retreat farm. Yep. But you folks also have, as I said, acreage in back with the trails on them. You have part of the West River meadows.
The meadows, yep.
The meadows.
The trail around the meadows. That trail, as our other trails do, goes on and off of different properties. So some of it's privately owned, some of it's owned by Brattleboro Retreat and others, but we maintain the trail there. And so we added boardwalks, we cut some steps into rocks that was previously you could only hold onto a rope to scramble over it. And the first half mile, if you start on the Route 30 end, is now what's called universally accessible. So it's wider, and it's not gravel or asphalt where it's that flat, but it's more easily traversable.
Yes.
So and we're actually going to be putting in new interpretive signage soon, so that talks about some of the plants and animals, and has prompts for you to think about your place in all that system.
They are so beautiful and so much fun to walk, and it's sort of a hidden treasure. Yeah. That's
such a great place to discover new plants or tracks of animals, that sort of thing. And it's a hidden sort of gem.
It is. And there's benches here and there.
We have just added some new benches.
Oh, good.
Yes, they're made by a local woodworker named Matt Carruthers, who has a business called Live in Roots, and they're gorgeous. So,
And that's one thing Brattleboro needs in general is more benches, I think. Yeah. Downtown and on trails. I would like to mention at this point is that I think my last 3 shows have been, and this is by coincidence, not planned, but it's been Kate Trasko's was on from the downtown Brattleboro Downtown Alliance. We have so many DBs and DBCCs and
so many acronyms.
And they all B's and C's. And then Greg Lesh from the Chamber of Commerce, and you. And there's another show, but. What I'm finding is that people are talking, and we'll talk about this with the retreat farm, is the collaboration. Everybody is underlying collaboration. Everybody is talking about how everyone is collaborating in different ways and how there are overlaps, but you're finding ways of making those all work. And I think right now we are, it hasn't been that long since the election, and I think that I think so many of us have realized that we really need to tend our own gardens and make them strong and healthy. And I see that happening in Brattleboro, and it's just so amazing and heartening to see.
Yeah. I think so, and I hope so, and I'm hopeful, along these lines. And we, I think, believe in collaboration to the extent that we are actually going through a process right now where we're articulating our values as an organization. Our values have always been imbued in the things that we say and that we do, but we want to make it clear, these are our values and this is how we try to accomplish our mission and why. And one of our values is collaboration, that we really value partnership and rising tide lifts all boats sort of a mentality, right? We also recognize we have a lot of space, but not necessarily capacity, and others may have capacity that we don't have, but not enough space, and so why not work together? But some of the successful examples of this, I think, have been our work with BMAC on the Artful Ice Shanties, hosting Music Under the Stars with Brattleboro Music Center, and
River
puppets,
Gallery.
Having river galleries, plein air. Painters on site was so much fun this summer, and they also hosted a kids camp. And then I have a meeting tomorrow to talk about Puppets in Paradise next year. With Sandglass Theater. So we're happy to work with others that are aligned with our mission, that are doing good work in our community.
Yeah.
And this extends also to the more sort of business aspects of what we do. You know, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, but we do have these 2 new enterprises that opened this year in the North Barn. So we have this renovated North Barn and the Retreat Farm Market and Food Center. So which I hope folks have had a chance to stop by and see, and I welcome everybody to come by and see, and I'd be happy to give tours. In the market, our food center manager, Thomas, has done a phenomenal job of reaching out to different food producers that are very much in alignment with our values. So we now have something like 100 producers represented in the market, and about 90% of those are from within 100 miles, most from Vermont. And we are able to point to examples of how they're either doing positive environmental practices, if it's regenerative farming or organic farming, different things, or if they treat their staff exceptionally well, or they give back to their community, that sort of a thing. So in everything that we do, we're thinking of the collective, of the collective impact of everybody's action and trying to work together. We have the Retreat Farm Market in front, so that's where the Grafton Village Cheese Company's store was. And then where in the factory portion, we are chipping away at repurposing it as a multi-tenant food production space. So we had our first tenant start in March, and that is oh my gosh, I almost said it wrong. Finale Ferments.
Finale Ferments.
Yes, and Finale Ferments. So they make sauerkrauts and kimchis and pickles and things. And they're a fantastic young company, and that's trying to change the world and make everybody healthier in the process. So they actually operate back where Grafton used to make cheese, behind the windows that you can see from the market. So sometimes when they're actually making their products, you can watch them do that, which is kind of cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah, we were fortunate, to get that facility. We acquired funds through Senator Patrick Leahy's office. We had received congressionally designated funds. So we were able to acquire the facility, and Grafton leased for a time until they were ready to move to their new facility. We're now to the end of the money that Leahy secured. So we have to carefully think through. I think I've got funds spent about 10 ways in my head. We've got a million different ideas, but we are little by little we'll be chipping away at really. Creating space that can support small producers, valued producers in our community. The food production space is just food production space. It's a rental situation, sort of like BDCC has at the cotton mill and elsewhere. But then what's nice is, and what's fun about this is that then they can sell their product in the store and could do tastings. We could do workshops. So we really want to be able to work with folks who are keen to do educational programming as well, and really get the public involved to understand what their food is and where it comes from, and what the benefits are to our community and that sort of thing.
Right. Yes, you're having wine tastings as well as many of these other things. Let's just go back to the North Barn a little bit, because that was such a huge endeavor. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be there for an event this early fall, I think it was. It's extraordinary space. There's something about it. It is very much like walking into a cathedral. The way the ceiling rises with the rafters that are hand hewn. You did a lot of work on that building.
I always get a little sheepish when people say that, because I barely did anything. But our team did an amazing job.
It's the royal we.
Yes, the royal we. It's pretty phenomenal. And we worked with the State Historic Preservation Office for guidance to make sure that it remains an historically significant building. So you do still see the hand-hewn beams, and we had to insulate on the outside in order to preserve the architecture inside, so the slate was taken off, and SIPS panels, insulation was put on the outside, and then the slate put back on. So a lot of details, a lot of detailed work, a lot of painstaking work was undertaken by DEW, our construction the company we worked with, and all their subs. So it's phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. Is that where the Thirsty Goat is?
Yes, the Thirsty Goat bar is inside. So we have a full bar there, and a catering kitchen as well.
Yeah, and so you can rent it to have events.
Absolutely.
It's good for weddings. It's good for any kind of
conferences, meetings, galas. We had our first wedding in October, which was so much fun, and we've had a number of different galas and events, from Yellow Barn to the hospital to Beak. I mean, a number of different places have had some of their events there, and then we've had our own as well, where we had a food preparation workshop. We did a miso making workshop with a woman named Kaylee C, and we've had jazz night. We had a collaboration with the Vermont Jazz Center on November 8th, which felt really good at that time. And we're going to be doing more of that starting this winter. So we'll have additional jazz nights in there, and we're going to find different ways to enliven the space whenever we can. You're
working with a lot of the music. You've mentioned Vermont Jazz Center, the Yellow Barn, Brattleboro Music Center. You've also worked with the Vermont Theater Company, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Boys and Girls Club you have partnered with in different
Boys and
things.
Girls Club actually has their after-school kids club program at Retreat Farm.
Oh, nice.
We have a classroom space that's in what we call our calf barn, which is where some of the animals stay, right next to the play tractor. And so they actually have a program for grades K through 5, and they come every day after school, and that includes my daughter. So conveniently, Boys and Girls Club goes and picks my kid up from school for me, and then she gets outdoor ed at Retreat Farm, which is great.
That is so great. That's every day after school?
Yep.
Incredible.
During the school year. Mm-hmm.
What a great community.
It is. It's awesome. When I saw, and that was something I saw that was happening, I can't take credit for that happening, but when I was moving here and trying to figure out, when you move with a kid, it's just your heartstrings get pulled, and you want them to have an easy transition, and to know that existed, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, was just such a phenomenal thing.
We can go back to Buzz Schmidt, who was the gentleman who started this in 2015, I believe.
Officially 2015 is when we became a nonprofit. Buzz is nothing if not a visionary. So this is very much his baby, I think, and he, the North Barn project took years. That didn't happen overnight, right? So that's been in the works for at least 7 years, I think, at this point, for the funding and the loan that we got for that to all come together and to have the architectural plans done and so forth. So he absolutely drove that and made the connections happen that led us to be able to acquire what's now the food center. And I know you and some of your viewers will be familiar with Act 250 plans, and you have to sort of think about how you want to use a space when you're creating a plan for it and what all the possible uses are. And I'll tell you, everything that could possibly happen under the sun is baked into our Act 250 plan. So he had so many ideas, and so I think there's so much more potential of that space as well. It's really the challenge now is to figure out what we can do sustainably. Yeah. I'm indebted to Buzz. I mean, I wouldn't be in Vermont if it weren't for his vision for Retreat Farm. Yeah. Connecting people to the land through local food, place-based education, and recreation. That's kind of part of your mission statement. And the thing that I think that has happened in that period, even in that period of time since 2015, is bringing in our awareness of our Native heritage here. So Wantastagok, and you've been working with Rich Holshoe and having interpretive signage along the way as well, so that as we become aware of the flora and fauna in the area, we become aware also of who was here before us. Yes, absolutely, and maybe even shift the way that we think about our relationship with these things, where we think of ourselves less as landowners and more as stewards who are in relationship with the sort of other than human relations around us. Preserving Retreat Farm gives people the opportunity to think about the cultural and natural heritage of the farm itself. That farm has been there for a really long time, right? 1837. The patients who were there were working the farms, and they were making the trails. I mean, my remembrance is that there were 50 miles of trails from the retreat and all the way. I wouldn't be surprised. There was so much land. The intent, from my understanding, of having the patients work the farm to grow food for the patients and staff there was that it was a therapeutic thing to do. And so there's a long history of thinking about Retreat Farm as a therapeutic place, as a place of healing. And I see it as my job to continue that. And I see us really as a preventative measure, that we create safe space for connection, between people, but also to the forest and the animals, and to themselves. When you can just be in nature, it's powerful. So I think that when that can happen, and when there are spaces for people to connect like that to themselves, to each other, to nature, that healing can happen and wellness happens, and it's an important part of community health. So
Right.
I see us as a preventative health measure.
Yes, and so continuing that legacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
really wonderful. That
Yep.
is a really that puts it in a really good perspective. Kristin, we've talked about where you are in the community, and the beauty actually of that place is amazing. With the retreat meadows right across the way and all the trails and all of that. And you're right on Route 30, so you've got a lot of traffic going by, but you've also got a lot of tourists coming through.
Yes.
And I would imagine that Grafton Cheese probably brought in a lot of tourists over those years.
Sure.
So they know you there already. But can you talk a little bit about that, about maybe about the wider idea of tourism in our community?
Oh, I can try. It's definitely something I've thought a lot about in really in everywhere that I've lived, pretty much. It's been some sort of a tourist element to it. And there's always a tension with tourism, right? Where it's like, the tourists, the traffic is bad, or I don't know, there are different cultural differences that are frustrating. But at the same time, tourists are integral to a tourist economy. And I think that we certainly see, I'll put it this way, at Food Truck Roundup, we've seen people from all 50 states at Food Truck Roundup, as well as at least 5 countries. So there are people coming from all over the place to Brattleboro and to Retreat Farm, which is super exciting. And I am hopeful that those people come, and through Retreat Farm and through the amazing businesses and other nonprofits in the area, learn about Vermont and learn about our local agricultural, our local art scene. They leave with a better understanding of whatever messages we and others are trying to convey. And at the same time, they're filling our hotels and spending money downtown and at restaurants and so forth. So I know it's always, there's a love-hate with tourism, but I'd like to embrace it, at Retreat Farm. It's just, I think we need to zero in on the balance between service to tourists and to our local community. But, you're absolutely right. I think that Grafton solidified a strong following of folks that are, getting off of Route 91 and then heading destinations north and west.
Yeah, right.
And so our market, caters some to tourists, but then we have our trails and grounds accessible for the public 365 days a year, dawn to dusk. It's open.
It's amazing. That's amazing. Yes. So people can stop there, and their kids can pet the animals, and they can get something to eat. And Food Truck Roundup in the summertime is
always a favorite.
Always
which
a favorite.
I love. That's the sort of thing that it's like I would want to come there even if I didn't work there. So I love my job. For those sorts of things. And it's nice now. We're thinking more year round. I think previously we've been somewhat limited to the warmer seasons to be able to do programming, and now we're with the North Barn. It's expanding our thinking some, and so we've got a series that'll be coming up this winter with the Vermont Jazz Center. We're also with a new staff member, a new farm manager who has a background in arts education. Is going to be leading some arts-based programming. So we'll be doing animal figure drawing classes and other things. So lots of fun stuff coming up on the horizon.
Wow. So stay tuned. Stay tuned, everybody. And you've got a website, so people can check out the website to find out what's happening.
retreatfarm.org.
That's pretty easy.
Yes,
and we'll have that info at the end of the show as well, that you can get your pencils while we finish up here. Thank you so much,
Oh my gosh,
Kristin.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
It was great.
Was
it's a whirlwind. I'm so glad you were able to, cover so many bases, in half an hour. It's very impressive. But I do think that it's so interesting to me, your interest in anthropology and Indigenous people and the work that you've done before coming into, threading down into Brattleboro. And it feels like, again, this campus, that is here has a little bit of everything there.
It does. It really brings together a lot of my interests, and hopefully has something also for everybody in the community.
I think so. I think it would be hard to miss.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks to all of you folks. This is a pretty fabulous amount of information about what's happening down at the Retreat Farm. It's an easy walk from downtown, And again, there are all the trails. You know, if you have an afternoon, like all of these beautiful afternoons that we've had, with nothing to do, you can just go down there and hop on a trail, and you know, it'll clear your head, which is something we all need. So thanks for tuning in. Be aware that Brattleboro is a real happening place. We've got so much going on between all the work that all these people are doing, Kristin and the downtown folks. So take a walk around town, see what's happening, and tune in to Here We Are. We'll be back next week.